to the strength and success of all our defense forces. May all their offenses go well and wipe out our enemies. And today is a special type of miniature Yom Kippur Katan, the eve of Rosh Chodesh. It's always as we're approaching Rosh Chodesh. So hopefully that will add even more power and oomph to what we're doing. So we learned about the tragedy of the decline spiritually in the Shomron area and northern Israel, led by Rechavam, who's the first one to be called a Chotei and Machti. Let's cast our eyes southward and see, well, what's happening in the kingdom of the house of David. Okay? And here we'll see a synopsis of what's happening as led by Rechavam. I'm going to ask you to notice what is repeated, and then we'll ask why it's repeated, and then maybe we'll have some insight to processes that are happening right now inside the kingdom of Yehuda, kingdom of the house of David. So we're told here in Pasuk of Aleph, Rechavam, meaning, in contrast to what we learned about the Shomron kingdom, Rechavam ben Shlomo, Malach beYehuda. And as it's stated in Divrei Yamim, in addition, another tribe called Benjamin. Just maybe we can call it the Judean kingdom, because the capital is in Yehuda, Yerushalayim. Notice, he's not a young boy when he started. Ben 41 shana, Rechavam b'molcho, u'shvaisre shana malach b'Yerushalayim. What is Yerushalayim? Hayar shebachar Adonai lasum et shemo sham mikol shiftei Yisrael. V'shem imo Naama ha'amonit. Why does the Tanakh have to tell us now that Rechavam is 41? He started at the age of 41. He ruled sum total 17 years. What is the significance? Furthermore, why are we reminded here that, oh, by the way, Yerushalayim is the capital city that God chose. That's the place where his divine presence is going to appear. Of all the tribes, he chose that. Why is that mentioned? Furthermore, V'shem imo Naama ha'amonit. When I heard once the shur of not Chula, the Rav in Eli, Rav Kashtiel, so he once asked, wow, that's interesting. Aren't there a lot of figures in the Tanakh, their mothers are not mentioned who they are? Okay.
She's from Ammon.
Excuse me, so what? She's not Jewish. It's a side matter. You're right. The king of Israel has to have a Jewish wife. Or may the king of Israel only have a wife who's born Jewish. As the section says, Som tasim alecha melech mikerav achecha. Is that only talking about the king himself? That has to be from amidst your brothers? Or is it also applicable to the wives of the kings? Okay, so we'll mention that. So why is it so important to mention his Ima? That means, of course, that Naama is one of the wives of Shlomo. That's interesting. Didn't Shlomo have a multitude of wives? Yes, he did. Isn't that interesting that?
The main wife was Papa.
And isn't that interesting that Tafka from this woman is the successor of Shlomo HaMelech, right? Rechavam's mom is Naama.
So it's so special.
L'chaim. Not just to Chaim, but to God first. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shakol nibidvo. Okay. We should know that Naama ha'amonit. Chazal tell us in the spotlight that apparently she was from a very special family. She had, as we say, yichus, mishpacha miyucheset, to the dynasty of the kings of Ammon. In other words, she comes from the royal family. It certainly fits in with the theme that Hamelech Shlomo was interested in, because remember, he wanted to bring in the centers of the international world to Yerushalayim, to bring them closer to the belief of one God, and as we state in Aleinu L'Shabach, L'Taken Olam B'Malchut Shaddai, to correct the Almighty Kingdom in God's Almighty Kingdom, to correct our world in the Almighty Kingdom. So there are even some that say that she was the granddaughter of Hanun ben Nachash, Melech ben Ammon, that we learn about in Sefer Shoftim. He was a rotten guy, and he did a lot of bad things. Not by mere incident does he get the title Nachash. Okay, not everyone gets Nachash. Nonetheless, Chazal spoke with great praise, as if in one breath. When they praised Ruth HaMoaviyah, together with Ruth, she, Naamah Ammonit, is praised as well. As the Gemara says in Masechet Baba Kama on page Lamed Chet. However, and there's a big however, and now let's read, and then might we assume why these things are happening. Pasuk Kav Bet. Vayas Yehuda hara b'nei Adonai, vayikanu oto mikol asher asu avotam, bechatotam asher chata'u. Please don't allow ourselves to read this in a shallow way and understand, well, in one day, just out of yonder, things degenerated and we're doing require time, maybe even for more years. Nonetheless, what are we learning about? That lo and behold, here in Yerushalayim and in the Judean kingdom, things are getting really bad. When the Tanakh writes the term Vayikanu Oto, it means that they're kindling God's wrath regarding the big idolatry prohibition, and therefore things are getting truly out of hand. And the question is, what's behind this? What's behind this spiritual degeneration? Before we answer what's behind it, let's see to what extent things are getting out of hand. Pasuk of Gimel, verse 23. Vayivnu gam hema lahem bamot umatzevot vashirim al kol giva gvoha v'tachat kol eitz ra'anan. We all know that once the Beit HaMikdash is built, what is outlawed? All other altars. You can't build an altar not on the top mountain, and not in the woods, and not in the grove, and not on any hilltop. And here we see, and again, out of a process, things are happening that bamot, private altars, are being prohibited. Now, let's even say that people are building these altars to serve Hashem, and it's not at all for idolatry. However, the fact is that Nachman, you want to have something which is conducive for your needs. You want to have your colors. You're in favor of your convenience, and therefore you're building your own altars to serve God. Oh, isn't that beautiful to have your own convenience and comfort, and don't have to get on a bus to travel to Yerushalayim? But that's similar to the idea that we mentioned yesterday. When privatism enters into our world of Judaism, and our private concerns are paramount above our holy national concerns, then you're turning serving into Hashem into a private matter. You build your own synagogue on your hill, and you invite everyone to pray to one God, but God said, don't do these things. Okay? So here it is, even though they're serving God here, they're doing their altars. They're on their altars, they're praying to Hashem, they're practicing and serving Hashem. Even so, we know that it's outlawed, and we see things the way it's stated here, that it's spreading. Again, it could be over a decade or 2 decades, everywhere. Kol giv'a gvoha, kol eitz ra'anan. Remember, the building of altars was a very special thing during the time of the patriarchs. Okay, bisman avot, it was permitted. These bamot, especially matzevot. Matzevot is a one stone, a block of stone to serve God. We know that during the Avot, Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, they were had a lot of affinity for building a matzeva and doing sacrifices and serving Hashem. However, since apparently that's what the Rambam writes, this was the practice of the Canaanites as well. When the time came at Mount Sinai, so Hashem outlawed these matters. Not only outlawed, but as we learn in Chumash Devarim, all of these private altars have to be destroyed. as it says in Chumash Dvarim, quote, Abei ta'abdun et kol ha'mekamot. You have to destroy all these places. So now we see a proliferation, an increase in amount of private serving of God. Things are getting out of hands. And that is leading to, one second, he is a gentleman who raised his hand.
The matzevot were outlawed because they're associated with idolatry.
Yes.
But the Asherah tree.
So you see, from the Bamot to Matzevot to Asherim, obviously we're adopting Canaanite culture. And the process is very clear to us what's happening. Yet we've yet to answer what is behind this. What led to this Yerida Ruchanit over the times of these 17 years that Rechavam is ruling?
Who is the Navi at this point?
There was a Navi from Yehuda during this time. Achia is there. Those are we're going to learn about Shemaiah that appears in Divrei Hayamim. Pasuk Kaf Dalet, I'm sorry. V'gam Kadesh Haya Va'aretz. Kadesh is the technical word for adultery. In other words, not only idolatry is happening, but also adultery. And this certainly fits in with the theme that when people are looking for comfort in their Jewish life and privatism, then, things become noach, and whatever is noach they'll do, even though things are outlawed. And it's now leading to adultery, which we know was a terrible thing that happened in Mitzrayim culture, a very gross culture, and now it's being brought here into Yehuda. Asu kechol ha'toevot hagoyim, they're referring to basically Mitzrayim culture, asher horish Hashem mipnei bnei Yisrael, but also the Canaanites, the same nations that we conquered, the Canaanite nations, and their ways of life, which were to be obliterated. Now, hundreds of years later, they're sinking in to Jewish life, even in Yerushalayim and into Yehuda, in all these places. So there is a perush that it's not just the Jews that are doing, but it's also the nations that living in Israel, meaning non-Jews living here, that they're committing adultery. So what? That's their life. So what? So there's those that say, well, if they're doing it here in Israel and we're ruling over Israel, we should have been preventing this or asserting our power to stop this, but we didn't, and therefore Israel is responsible. If we look at a second in Divrei Yamim, look at Divrei Yamim Bet, please, if you have the full Tanakh in front of you. Divrei Yamim Bet, yes. Perek Yud Aleph. Divrei Yamim Bet, Perek Yud Aleph.
All right, perfect. Wait.
I'm waiting.
Yamim Bet, Yud Aleph, Vayavo Rechavam.
That is the chapter. We're going to skip. Here we're told all the good things that Rechavam did. We learned this previously. Remember, he went into urban development. He developed many cities, just like Yerovam did. This was after the time that was the fear of the Civil War. And now let's start from Pasuk Yud Zayin, verse 17. It says, "Veichasku et malchut Yehuda vayimtzu et Rechavam et Shlomo l'shalosh shanim." After the former crisis of the about to have a civil war, we're told that things for 3 years are just lovely, socially, financially, religiously. Ki alchu b'derech David u'Shlomo l'shalosh shanim. Okay, thank God things are moving just right. However, vayikach la Rechavam isha. Her name is Machalat ben Yerimot ben David Avihail bat Eliyav ben Yishai vatela lo banim et Yeush v'et Shmaya v'et Zam v'acharei lakach et Maacha bat Avshalom. Here's another wife, vatela lo et Aviyah v'et Atai v'et Ziza v'et Shlomit. And then in Kaf Aleph, vayahav Rechavam et Maacha bat Avshalom mikol nashav ufilakshav ki nashim 18 nasa very, very similar to his father, or to his grandfather David. Ufilakshim shishim, vayoled asimu shmona banim, 28 kids, v'shishim banot, and 60 girls. Vayamed larosh Rechavam ben Aviyah ben Achal nagid be'achav. So he appoints Aviyah to be the leaders of all the kids. Kilam Nichoi thinks he's going to be the next king, as we're going to see later. However, Vayaven, Vayifrot, Mikol Banav, and so on and so forth. Did you notice that here the Tanakh states an interesting statistic, and there must be reason for that. That as far as going in the path of David, here the grandson Rechavam, we're only talking about 3 years. 3 years of the kingdom of how many? 17 years. Things are sound, socially, religiously, and so on. Only later, after these 3 years, do we see what's described here. And that is going further away from the Torah. Don't misunderstand that we're talking just about Bnei Yehuda, but we're talking about the things are happening publicly, and the king and other leaders don't stop or prevent things happening spiritually. And therefore, as we're reading here, Rechavam has the responsibility. Rechavam has the responsibility. Now, we know that our political lives as a nation in the land of Israel are not just politics. Okay? We have a concept called politica elokit. We have divine politics. We honestly believe that things that happen and related to the nation of Israel are divinely led, even though we have national leaders. We're about to read a clear punishment let's open up back on in chapter 14, that internationally Hashem is going to allow things to happen. And therefore political events that happen to the nation, we believe are from the hand of God, especially when we're talking about infiltration of an outside entity. Here it is, Pasuk Kafei 25, the punishment. Vayiba shana chamishit lemelech Rechavam. 2 years after what we just discussed in Divrei Yamim, in the 5th year, Allah shishak melech Mitzrayim al Yerushalayim. Now we're not talking that he's coming up for a friendly visit and bringing some gifts, but here we're clearly talking about a severe punishment. If we go on there in chapter 12 in Divrei Yamim, he brings 1,200 chariots, that's like 1,200 tanks, and he brings 60,000 horse riders. That is a large army, 60,000 horse riders, 1,200 Rechavim chariots. He's coming up to attack and take away the kingdom of Rechavam. Okay? What is done in order to prevent this matter? Money, wealth, is often a matter that's important to outside infiltrators. And bevakasha, just take this. What do they take? Pasuk Kavav, Vayikach et otzrot Beit Adonai, vet otzrot Beit HaMelech, vet hakol lakach, Vayikach et kol maginei hazahav asher asa Shlomo. One simple meaning of as far as the gold and the treasures that are taken, we're talking about the silver and the gold that perhaps remained in the national treasury from the time of David. Well, if it's either our money or giving them Yerushalayim, we can save Yerushalayim by giving them our money. But we just didn't give it to them. They came in and took it. We didn't bother them. We didn't fight against them. They have such a large army. So that is one meaning, the Otzarot Beit Hashem. Another interesting meaning is, and this relates back to many national events before that, the Gemara Mesechet Psachim traces, if I'm not mistaken, yeah. No. Here it is. Psachim Daf Kuf Yetet, towards the end of the Mesechet. Let's go back to who brought down, perhaps, who had a lot of silver and gold in the Chumash, do you think?
Your microphone fell.
What's that?
Your microphone.
Thank you.
there was,
In Breshit, who do you think had a lot of silver and gold? Okay, who else?
No, Yaakov.
Paro. Well, who was really selling everything for the silver and gold? Who was selling food? It would go to the treasure. It was Yosef. The Gemara says in Masechet Pesachim, all the silver and gold of the world, Yosef really collected and brought it to Mitzrayim. There's a midrash that says that. And he collected all that silver in Eretz Mitzrayim, from Eretz Canaan. Where do we know that he had other sources of silver and gold? So the Gemara brings that when the Jewish people left Mitzrayim, we emptied them out. It says in next week's parsha, quote, and it says also in a prophecy before that, Vayinatzelu et Mitzrayim. We're going to empty them out, l'rokain. And that's what the Targum Onkelos translates. Well, the Gemara tells us all that silver and gold was held in the national treasury from the time of Yeshua all the way to David, Shlomo, and now Rechavam. What did Shishak do? He took it back. He took away all the national treasury that Yosef had collected and eventually brought by Am Yisrael when we came out of Mitzrayim. So he took it from Rechavam, as we're learning here, all the Otzrot Beit Hashem and the Otzrot Beit HaMelech. We're going to learn later, there are going to be international wars here in the Middle East. Okay, the king of Cush, Zerach, the king of Cush will come and take this treasury from Shishak. Later on, we're going to have a king called Asa, the king of Israel, and he'll take it from Zerach, the king of Cush. And then it'll be sent, B'kitzur, it'll go to Bnei Ammon, they'll take it. Yoshaphat, a later king in Judea, will take it from Bnei Ammon, and it'll be there until Achaz, another king of Judah who did terrible things, Achaz Melech Judah, until we get punishment. Ashur, Assyria, the king called Sancheiriv penetrates into Eretz Yisrael, and he takes all this gold. Until Chizkiyahu, HaMelech Yehuda, a great righteous king from the house of David, he takes it back, and it's there until the last king. Who was the last king in Sefer Melachim? Tzidkiyahu. When he's overcome by Nebuchadnezzar, he has his eyes poked out, and he is exiled to Babylon. So too, it's taken by the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar. And it's there, in a way, until the Persian kingdom comes around, and they take it from the Babylonian kingdom. And then, 200 years later, the Greeks come around, and they take it. And then, of course, the last stop is in Rome. And the Roman king, that's what the Gemara says, is taking it. And the last three words of this famous Gemara on page 119 in Pesach Pesachim, Va'adayin munach beromi. So if we would send in special forces to the Vatican, we would find a lot of gold and silver that's, and maybe the menorah of the Second Temple as well, as we see in various artistic places that are in the Vatican. And it's just a matter of time that it's going to come back.
It's actually still there, all the treasuries, because
Why don't we ask the Pope?
Isn't there a witness that
I don't know. I don't think the Pope would admit to it. I mean, there have a lot of secrets that were hiding in the Vatican, and people don't have access to those places, if I'm not mistaken.
Rome, Italy were also like during history plundered and savaged like by other nations.
Could be. I don't know. The Gemara says, and this we're talking about. This is the 5th century when this Gemara is authored, published in the 400s in the 5th century.
the end of the 5th
Yeah,
century,
it's already.
plundered.
Yeah, it was.
Rome
Yeah,
was the end of 470. It was by
the
Germans.
German.
Maybe it's Berlin. You can go and check it out.
When you're there.
Germany lost in World War II, so all the treasure got to American citizens.
So maybe it's in the
American
Pentagon.
Soviets.
Maybe it's in Fort Knox.
Somewhere in Russia, maybe.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think we can just go in and invade there because it's the middle of Rome.
Right.
So we'd have a problem with Italy. But in theory,
Okay, we'll send you when time comes. Pasuk Vav. Let's finish the matter here. Vayikach et otzot Beit Hashem. That's what we read basically. Furthermore, Pasuk Zayin. It's interesting that the Meginim of Zahav that Shlomo had made, those are these shields made out of gold are taken as well, and we see that there's an effort to make other Meginim for the army out of Nechoshet made out of copper. as we see in verse 27. Nonetheless, let's go to, this is the end of the chapter. Vayimi devo HaMelech Beit Hashem, Yisa'u maratzim v'shivu milta ratzim. He uses it for honor, but really the honor of Rechavam is degenerating, is going down. Idolatry, adultery, a big plunder that we lose to Mitzrayim. The way to salvage Yerushalayim is by offering, apparently, the Egyptian king Shishak all this wealth. So we see right now that not only is there an estrangement to Torah and mitzvot led by Yeravam, maybe it's led by Rechavam. Is it led by Rechavam? Notice the last pasuk of this chapter. First, before that, let's find out about something we didn't know. There are skirmishes going on, unfortunately, between Jews, between two kingdoms. Look at verse 30. Umilchamaita ben Rechavam uven Yeravam kol hayamim. Of course, when the Tanakh says kol, it means many days. Rov hayamim. It doesn't have to be only meaning all the is some of the days, not all the days, but that means there's border fire going on, there's skirmishes going on, unfortunately, between Jews. This is not pleasant to read about, but that's the truth. This is the barometer, the national barometer of the time. At this moment, as we're going to learn, Rechavam is already appointed Aviyah, as we saw already in Divrei Yamim in chapter 11. And it's stated here in the last pasuk, Vayishkav Rechavam im avotav. He does get burial in the family burial of David. Vayikaver avotav bi'ir David. V'shem imo nama amonit. And then it states, Vayimloch Aviyam beno tachtav. And perhaps your question is?
Why is it repeating his mother?
Beautiful. Interesting. The mother's name is mentioned again. So let's just summarize. When we start talking about Rechavam, Nama Amonit is mentioned. When we're concluding to speak about Rechavam, her name is mentioned again. What is that coming to tell us? So the Rabbi says that she is the one that left the derech, and she is the one that incited and caused the trouble, and eventually one thing led to another. But Naama Hamonit, the Ralbag says here clearly that, let me just read his few words, he doesn't say it in very length. The Malbim brings it as well. V'shem imo Naama Hamonit she'avda avoda zara le'et ziknat Shlomo. Towards the end of the life of Shlomo, she already began going back to her original ways, way after she did her giur. V'hi ya'atza oto leharshia. She's the one that counseled and led her own husband, Rechavam, to go in this direction, which we said is only 3 years after the beginning of his kingdom. So we have here is a sad ending. It seems here the Ralbag says, the Malbim says, Nama, she is the source, the root for going away from the Torah and mitzvot, leading Rechavam to mess up here. One matter leads to another matter. The building of Bamot to serve God, finally turning this into idolatry, and then adultery is going on, and there are no breaks, no limits. It's not limited, not curved by the king, and therefore he has to take responsibility. So we see here at the end of this chapter an interesting parallel that just like things are degenerating in the Shomron, north of Yerushalayim, so too are they in Yehuda, and Rechavam is responsible, and he's led by his wife, who went off of his mother, who apparently is a very strong personality, and she's leading all this matters, and that's the unfortunate ending. And now we're leading to the next king, which will be Aviyam, the son, instead.